We're here today with Len Kalkwarf, and I'm Fran Duvall, the host for today. And today is the second day of 2019. That's Wednesday, January 2nd. And here we are, Len, talking about the 43rd president.
And it's the 13th presidential library, and it's the last of the official libraries of the presidents. And not only that, it is also our last program that we're going to be doing. We've been doing this now for, can you believe, 10 years.
Wow, no, I don't believe it.
And 4 times a year, so that's about 40 sessions that we've done together, which has been very interesting. It's been very educational for me, at least, and I hope it has been for our viewers as well.
Yeah.
But George W. Bush is the last of the official library. Now, there are other libraries I've mentioned before.
Can you mention what the official library means?
It means that it belongs under the auspices of the the administration of the federal government.
The archives.
The archives and the administration.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I've written about all of them in the book that I published.
Yeah.
And by the way, it is available. I do have it. I have copies of it available in my office.
Yeah.
So, but today we want to talk a little bit about George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. Okay. The first thing I want to do is show some pictures of the Presidential Library, which is located in Dallas, Texas, on the campus of the university that Laura attended.
Okay.
Not where he attended, but Laura attended. So let's start with the first one, and we'll see a picture of the library itself. And it was interesting, this particular library, I had an experience that I never had in any of the others. I walked in and we had to go through security, and never had that experience before. And so I said to the man, you know, why, you know, and he kind of gruffly said to me, no guns, no guns. That was his I found out later on that since this was the last one I went to, and this was later on over all of the others, at that time there was no need for that kind of security and so on, but I understand that many of them now also require the security. In fact, I think a lot of the federal buildings require that.
Well, after the 9/11.
Yes, but at that time,
well, even
I was
before
kind of taken aback by the fact that I had to go through security and all that. So, okay, we'll go on to the next one. The next 2 pictures are really collages, and these are kind of show some of the things that Bush did during his presidency. The next one's the same thing, is another collage. And then we'll go on to the next one. Again, I guess it's still another one of the collages. This is the first thing that you see when you come into the library and start walking through it. Of all the libraries, I found this probably the least exciting. I don't know why, it may have been personally, but there wasn't an awful lot there, it seemed to me. One of the saving graces of this library was Laura. Mm-hmm. And there are several pictures of her and what she had done, mm-hmm. and so on, and we'll mention a few of those things. Okay. One of the things that Bush did, he had a major tax cut, and this particular graph shows the effect of the tax cut and what it supposedly did and was supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. All right, and then now the next one is really in the area where Laura was very prominent, the program called No Child Left Behind. And probably is one of the pluses of Bush's administration. Mm-hmm. The program itself had some real controversies later on, but when it first started, it had the right idea, and some of it continued, and some of the good things continued about it, and I'll mention a little bit of that later on. All right, the next one. This is one of the things that Bush established, a faith-based and community initiative, where many people became very upset about this because it seemed to be blurring the lines between church and state. Mm-hmm. And Bush wanted a lot of the money to be funneled through some of the church activities and so on, and people were upset about that. Okay. All right, let's go on. Here again, we see something about Laura, and there were any number of pictures of Laura throughout the building.
Is that unusual as the libraries go that you visited?
Yes.
The First Lady was not prominent?
Most of the time, although Nancy Reagan was very much involved in hers.
Okay.
And also Pat Nixon, as I think about it now, is shown quite a bit. In fact, there's a part of the building there is dedicated to Pat Nixon.
I see.
So
I'm sorry,
yes.
I didn't mean to divert you, but
that's fine. That's helpful.
Since you mentioned it a couple of times, I thought maybe that was unusual.
Okay.
So it is. Yeah.
Now the next picture is probably known to a lot of people because we saw this in the newspapers. This is the day of 9/11 when Bush was in a school reading a book, and then he was told about the 9/11 event in New York City. So, okay. Part of the remains of the 9/11 disaster in New York is in the museum here, and that's what this one is. Okay. Okay. Well, again, there was quite a bit of information about the 9/11.
Well, it was so major. It was a totally major thing that happened in our country.
Not only was it major, it really created his presidency. It changed his whole presidency.
Between that and Katrina, he faced two big disasters.
And then it talked about the war and so on as a result of all of this. So yes, it made his presidency what it became. All right. Out of that also grew a change in our governmental laws, the Patriot Act. Again, a very controversial thing because of the authority that was given to the law enforcement and so on. And again, many people were upset about that. And I remember my barber, for example, this was in Pennsylvania. He really kept carrying on every time I got my hair cut, and I finally almost got tired of going to him because he was so anti about this. Okay, talked about defending the freedom, okay, and this is all under the Patriot Act, really. Again, this is the Bush doctrine, talking about the fact that they're going to make no distinction between the terrorists and the nations that harbor them. That was part of his, talking about Iraq later on and so on. Now here's Laura. Again, as I say, there was quite a bit of information about her. We go on to grateful for our freedom, faithful to our cause. Again, a comment made by President Bush. Outside to the back of the library are the two bronze statues of George W. and his father. And it was, I thought, a very appropriate thing to be done. Okay. And then at this particular time, George W. had just started doing his painting. And this was a special display there at that time. I don't think it's there anymore, but I have several pictures and I want to just show you.
That he did.
That he did.
That's of his dad there.
And you might recognize some of these. I'm no art critic, so I'm not going to make too many comments about what I think about his painting. But the next one is about one of the Arab sheikhs. And a final thank you from the George W. Bush's library. Okay, that's the extent of the pictures that I have. A couple things about the library that I thought was interesting. Every library, presidential library, has a replica of the Oval Office. This one was a little bit different. Most of them was maybe not even a full-size scale, but in any event, it was separate rooms. The doors were usually, you could stand in the doorway and look in, that was the extent of it. In Bush's library, it's open. You can go into the Oval Office. And when I walked in, the guy that was talking to the tourists at that particular point was just finishing up. And at the end, he said, "Now, if you want to sit in at the desk, you may do so. If you want to make a phone call from the Oval Office, you may do so." I thought it was...
Did you do it?
No, I did not.
Okay.
But I thought it was a very nice touch. The other thing that I thought was a very nice touch is right outside of the Oval Office, there was a DVD playing constantly of the two daughters, and they were in conversation with each other about their parents. And again, that was a very, very nice touch. So from that standpoint, yes, I enjoyed being there, but it is the last one of the official ones. The next one is now under construction, and that's Obama's, and that's in Chicago. And I think it's going to be another year or two before that is ready. Hopefully, I'll be able to go to it, and I might even add a chapter in my book.
I think that's a good idea. We might have to add another show.
Well, we
when
might,
that
yes,
opens.
that would be good.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Let's talk a little bit about the Bush's presidency. Controversial in many ways. It started out in a controversy. It started out in a controversy regarding the election. It was not definitely decided with Al Gore, and many of us certainly remember the recounts, the chads and all that.
Right.
And then finally the Supreme Court said enough is enough. Bush was declared as president, which many people still question, but nevertheless, that's what happened. Now, that's not the first time this happened. Back in 1876, there was a same type of a controversy. Rutherford Hayes was running against Tillman. Rutherford Hayes was a Republican. He did not win the popular vote. It was a real controversial thing, and it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said that he, the Republican, was elected. Part of that controversy was apparently some kind of a backdoor secret agreement that Hayes said he would withdraw all of the troops from the South, and that, which he did, and it really ended the Reconstruction. And as a result of that, the South would not and did not vote Republican for a long time. It became a Democratic stronghold, probably until LBJ, when LBJ declared the civil rights movement and the right to vote, for example. So it was not the first time.
But talking about the not winning the popular vote, he was the fourth.
He was the fourth, and now it's the fifth.
Now we have five presidents that were elected to office without winning the popular vote.
Right, and there are many, of course, who talk now in terms of, once again, about the Electoral College, and it ought to be changed because of that. So maybe that'll come to the forefront again.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. You never know. Okay. One of the things that Bush did and was very bipartisan was this child left behind. He got support from the Democrats as well. Later on, it became controversial in the sense that they felt there was far too much testing, and that teachers had to spend too much time getting their students prepared to take a test rather than actually be learning. And the other thing was that they felt that there was far too much a need for reporting the information and so on. It did point out some schools that were not doing very well at all. And again, the controversy here is that it probably was not so much the school as it was the social conditions, the surrounding that particular area. So, okay. Bush got off to a slow start as far as his presidency was concerned, but 9 months after he was in office, then the 9/11 took place, and it unified the nation, and unified the nation behind Bush. It's interesting. He had the highest polling rate of any president ever at that time. He had 90% approval rating. That's amazing.
That's unheard of.
Unheard of. Yes, 90%. If somebody gets over 50%, they're happy, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the other thing that happened shortly after that then was the fighting in Afghanistan, and this was again authorized by Congress. This was not so much Bush himself, but the Congress approved of this. The Taliban leadership they felt was involved in terms of the terrorist groups and so on. So what Bush never was able to do, though, was to kill the leader, Osama bin Laden. This was done, of course, later on by Obama, but even though he tried very, very hard.
He kept looking for him,
Kept looking for him, right. Yeah. The Patriot Act, I already mentioned that, but that gave the government a lot of new powers, which created some very strong divisions in
well, yeah, that whole torture thing, didn't that come into that?
Yes, and the right to invade persons' personal privacy and so on. So, but the biggest thing, I think, anti-Bush was his invasion of Iraq. The feeling that there were weapons of mass destruction, and trying to convince the public that this was the reason that they went into it. And then they were not found, no such weapons were found. It became a preemptive strike, really. So people...
I'd just like to point out there's a film out now by Rob Reiner called Shock and Awe, and it speaks to the whole weapons of mass destruction farce that went on that caused so many deaths and everything. But it's an excellent film and has a lot of the original clips that all of the officials were saying, you know, Powell and Tenet and Rumsfeld, all those, Cheney, all those people. So
all right, I have not seen it.
It's a good movie, and it does present it, I think, honestly.
Okay.
So, anyway.
All right. Another thing that Bush did, he created real large tax reductions. Again, questionable in terms of where some of it went, but it was not made permanent. But then when Obama came into office, he made some of these things permanent. So, and I mentioned about the No Child Left Behind as being a very controversial thing, and the reasons for it. Again, because of Bush's desire for tax reduction, created huge deficits in the federal budget. It's impossible, obviously, to cut down revenue and then have such large expenditures and not expect to have a real financial problem, but that's what happened here. The last few months of his, oh, by the way, the other thing that came out of during the time of his presidency, and especially toward the end, was the Republicans on the right, and created the Tea Party. The Tea Party was very much concerned about lowering taxes, reducing debt. They were against universal health care, also immigration control. And this all kind of began under his presidency.
Right.
And that was a controversial thing also. Then it seemed that no matter what he did, he became a lightning rod for controversy. So now he was not completely blameless, obviously, as I'm sure we would recognize of any president. The things he does creates either some good or the bad. One of the things he had promised, and he didn't really do, he was going to appoint some Democrats to his administration, and he only appointed one. The senator from Vermont left the Republican Party, and as a result gave the Democrats a majority. And so all the chairmanship of all the committees, including the Judiciary Committee, went to a Democrat. And they began to drag their feet in terms of approving the conservative judges that he wanted to appoint, and that's what happened when you have the majority.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. During this time, I think a lot of it was due to the war and 9/11, but the society became more polarized than ever. Culturally and politically, it seemed to me. And many of the talk radio programs now were very obviously either conservative or liberal, which is carried over right to the present time, it seems to me, but it kind of started at that point. So, okay. Let's see, what else? The Democrats at that time were promising that they would solve all of the problems, and the Republicans were very much involved in terms of legislating morality for everybody. So, so that kind of wraps up what I have.
Well, he did, though, when he left office.
Yeah.
We were in like almost the worst recession we
Yes,
ever had.
that
I
was-
mean, it wasn't the Great Recession, but it was close.
And a lot of that obviously was due to the war.
And the expenditure for that's
Yeah.
the military
Right.
expenditures. That's
Yeah.
what runs up our deficit a lot
That's
of
right.
times.
Well, it was an interesting presidency. And of course, immediately after that, we have Obama comes in, and things changed considerably.
It's amazing with the polarization that went on then.
Yes.
That Obama got elected, being a black man,
Right.
you know, et cetera. So.
Well, it showed the desire to change, a major change from what we had had. So, yeah. All right.
Yeah. Well, what did the historians say about him? About George W.
He's not listed as being one of the better presidents. He does not get the kind of rating that his father had. And of course, we saw some of that just recently in terms of George H.W. Bush's funeral.
Yes.
And the response and so on. When I went to see George H.W. Bush's library, I must say that I was very much impressed.
And where's his library?
It's also in Texas. It's on the campus of A&M in Texas.
Okay.
But what I experienced there, things that I had never really realized before, what kind of a man he was and all the things he had done, and especially his involvement in government. Now, his son, of course, had limited experience. He was governor of Texas, but that was about it. Whereas his father had been, head of the CIA, had been the ambassador to China,
Right,
served as vice president. Somebody said he was the best qualified man ever to become president.
And didn't he head the CIA or something?
Yes.
Yeah, at one point. This was H.W.
Yeah.
You know.
And then he only served one term. He was not reelected.
Well,
so,
Clinton, I
yeah.
think, came in. Well, and I was reading on, what do you call that, WikiLeaks?
Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, that this president, George W. Bush, that he was only the second in the nation's history of having a father that was
Yes,
was the president, John Adams being the other one.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting thing.
Yeah, there was one though who had a grandson who became president.
Yeah, Harrison. No.
Harrison.
Yeah, Harrison.
Benjamin Harrison. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Wow,
But he
I
only
remember
served.
that.
He only served one term between a man who served twice.
Yeah. Wait.
No, his name's not coming to me either.
No, God, why isn't it? Come on, we know that.
Yes, we know that, but
Well,
it'll come to us later.
The other thing was, you know, so many of our presidents had been lawyers or
Right.
had a law degree. If they weren't practicing, they were at least had a. But he didn't. George Bush not only. I don't mean to diminish it, but he had an MBA
Right,
from Harvard or Yale or one of
Yes,
those.
I think it was probably Yale. His father was from a Yale graduate. So
Okay,
probably
so,
Yale. Yeah.
So that was the other kind of difference. But in this political family, I mean, I think they had politics in their family back to grandfather.
The grandfather,
Being
he was a senator from Connecticut.
Senator, yeah.
Yes, he was, yeah.
Yeah, so
The other thing about George W., before he was elected, there was so much controversy about him. One thing was about his drunken driving, but also his service in the military. Now, he was a pilot. He did become a pilot. He was in the reserve, was it?
Yeah.
But the National Guard, I'm sorry. And his attendance in the National Guard apparently was not sterling.
Yeah, there were those questions.
Yes, a lot of,
to say it mildly.
yes,
Yeah.
right.
Well, this is good. I mean, this is a good way to end. I also read that while he didn't get great marks with historians when he left the presidency, his popularity with the people rose. You know, that they were more favorable toward him after he was out of office.
This probably will continue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's.
And of course, now he's being contrasted with
Oh
our
my
president.
gosh.
So that
We can't
his rating
contrast
stands even.
anybody to this current president.
well, his rating now is much better because of that.
So thank you very much.
Okay, you're
I
welcome.
hope you all enjoyed that.